Hello folks, welcome to our City Matters. Today we have special guests with us to speak about some homelessness situations or some drug dependency or rehab situations that are needed in the community for resources and help and volunteerism. Today we have furthest here is Rich from Helping Hands, and we have Stephanie from Serenity Place. Now, if you can introduce yourself, maybe Rich, you can introduce yourself. And
hello, thank you for having me here. My name is Rich Doyle. I'm the Executive Director of Helping Hands Outreach Ministries, which has 2 locations here in town. I'm also part of the managing board for the Day Center for the Homeless here in the community, which is really one of the front lines that how we reach the homeless population and try to connect them to services.
Great. And Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Bergeron. I'm the Development Director at Serenity Place here in Manchester. We're a substance abuse disorder treatment facility that treats adults and mostly the most vulnerable population here in the city of Manchester.
Wow. Now, Rich, from what I understand, are you working with just men?
Helping Hands just serves adult men, but the Day Center serves adult men and women.
Okay. And Stephanie, you're working with the entire...
Yep, adult men and women, 18 and older.
18 and older. Okay. So, now, I think there are 2 different organizations do 2 different things?
Somewhat. We are very connected because a fair amount of the homeless community struggles with substance abuse issues. We actually have a very good working relationship with Serenity Place, and ironically one of our staff members also works part-time at Serenity Place. So it's kind of a nice inroad that we're one of the first to know if a bed's available, so we can really streamline the intake process, which in the state of New Hampshire can be very challenging when somebody is actively seeking services. However, according to SAMHSA and the beds we have available in the state, 1 out of every 10 people who actively seek services actually get the help they need.
Yeah, that's a very true statement. We offer a number of programs at Serenity Place, and the program that we probably piggyback on the most is our non-medical detox program, where I would say a majority of our clients are homeless, mostly unemployed, and they don't have the ability to pay. So I think the statistic right now in New Hampshire is that there's about 100,000 people that have a diagnosed substance abuse disorder, and only 6,000 of them are actively seeking treatment. And there's a lot of reasons to that, so that statistic, the 1 in 10, is probably pretty true. We only have about 7 to 8 detox beds available to the community. Our detox beds receive no state funding, so we rely on donations and grants because the $350 fee that we do charge, most of our beds are charitable beds because these people really have nowhere to go.
So how much
of that... excuse me. I just want to introduce you, Glenn, as my co-host today.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you for coming on.
How much of that reason of 1 to 10 and 1 to 8 that aren't getting help is because of funding on their part as well as on your part? You don't have the services to provide.
That's a very complex question. I think if people are not insured, or even if they have access to Medicaid, not all programs will accept Medicaid yet. I think there's so many barriers to treatment, whether it's mental health or substance abuse. One of them is stigma. There's not enough education around homelessness, mental illness, substance abuse. Obviously, we're in crisis with state funding for so many different programs. Substance abuse is critical right now all over the state, but primarily in Manchester. And a few weeks back, New Futures had a protest on the state grounds. I don't know if anyone saw that, where more than 300 people kind of lined the halls and lined the exterior of the building when they were going to start the budget process to represent the 300 people that died from overdoses last year in New Hampshire. So funding is an issue. The availability of the actual resources, I think we're 49th out of the 50 states for access to treatment. I can speak for our agency right now. For years, we've been battling, trying to expand to meet the need, and we've got nothing but pushback from the state. Not so much on the state level, but on the city level. We recently went through a zoning process for a property on Webster Street, and the outcome was not good. We hear a lot of lip service about we need more treatment and we need more resources, and when it comes down to it, when we're actually trying to do it, so we can have more beds, so we have more than those 7 detox beds, so we can treat more people. We want to give our resources to the most vulnerable people. We run so many programs in our tiny building on Manchester Street. Now we're on to Plan C because they denied our application for the second time. And that's in the city where the mayor just went out and said that we need more recovery resources.
So they didn't give you a variance? Or?
They didn't give us a variance. We were going to move 3 programs to this building. They denied our variance for a 28-day program for women, which is so drastically needed. And we did our due diligence and went through the whole process again, and they denied us again. And if you'd like to go back and look at the zoning board footage, it's actually kind of deplorable at the response that we got. It's almost like people are ignoring the fact that there's a crisis. Like, okay, there's a crisis, take care of it, but don't put the treatment facility near us.
It's funny how she says it.
The NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Not my backyard.
That's right.
Yep.
Our police chief keeps telling the board of mayor and aldermen, every time they talk about this, is that you can't arrest your way out of this.
Exactly. He's our biggest advocate,
Yet
Chief
we're
Mara.
not, as a city, we're not really doing anything. But I want to bring out an important point with the state. We have a state liquor store. We talked about that earlier.
Yes, we do.
And they're supposed to
alcohol
provide
fund.
a percentage of that funding
Yes.
for rehabs. Now, last year they should have given us $8 million. They got, what, $4 million?
It was less than that. It was
Less
a
than $4
couple
million.
$100,000.
How much of that do you guys get for your programs?
Well, I can tell you, we only get 2 grants. We get state grant and aid, which covers funding, covers part of the funding for our Lowell Street sober shelter. It's called a specialty shelter. That's how it's defined with the state. Really, what makes us different than New Horizons is we have an attachment of sobriety. Excuse me, you only have to be clean and sober that day. You could have used yesterday. And the whole point is we want that immediate intervention and to give people that opportunity where other programs say you have 30, 60, 90 days. You have to have clean and sober before you can get into them. Our permanent supported housing model on Central Street has that requirement, but usually men will go from Lowell Street to Central Street. So they've built the foundation. So we only get $52,000 a year from SGIA, and then we get another 27 and change from HUD for a safe haven program. It's the only safe haven program in the state.
Wow.
And it's specifically geared towards men who have co-occurring disorders, which means they have a diagnosed mental illness and a diagnosed substance abuse issue. Now, if you think of the statistics we talked about earlier, that's very frequent. The waiting list for that program for guys who already live at Central Street is about half the house. However, because it's a permanent supported housing model, guys can stay there as long as they like, as long as they're taking care of their responsibilities. Our average length of stay there with the guys I have there now is a little under 4 years. So that means guys have attained and maintained employment. They have attained and maintained their sobriety. And they are productive members of society. But they get there, and it's a very cost-effective program. We charge, the fee there is $130 to $145 a week, depending upon the room. But all your daily needs are met. We provide food, laundry services. You really don't have to go out for anything. And that's one of the issues that the state of New Hampshire and Manchester has, is affordable housing. People get clean and sober. They've gotten a job back. They're working for $8 to $10 an hour, but the cost of living in this city demands a lot more than that, where a 1-bedroom or an efficiency is $750, $850 a month. Now, if they're working full-time and making $8, $9 an hour because that's the job they can secure right now, they can't afford to get their own place, so where do they go?
A group home, is that considered a group home?
No,
it's not a group home.
It's a moving house more, isn't it?
We bought it from the American Eagles. It was an SRO, and it's classified with the city as an SRO, but it is a permanent supporting model.
With supervision.
Yep. But there's also benefits that go with that. The gentlemen who are there still have access to a case manager that's employed by Helping Hands. They still are automatically qualified for Manchester Mental Health. They're still automatically qualified for the healthcare program, CMC programs, just because they reside there.
And how many reside there?
Right now, 16 out of the 17 rooms are full.
16. And how many people are waiting? Or how many people do you think could use the services? I
could probably purchase 2 more buildings and fill them. I can tell you for a fact at Lowell Street, our waiting list is 72 applications long. That count was as of Friday.
And how many beds in that one?
We currently have 31.
And they're full?
It's full.
Can you imagine that? And there's 72 waiting.
Yeah. So in that building, in that program. I could build 2 more of them and fill them.
And Stephanie, how much money do you get from the state, like a liquor store? That money's supposed to go for
well, the
programs like
alcohol
this.
fund, if you're familiar with it, I don't think we get anything.
Wow.
I don't know if the city's got
Isn't that
anything.
funny? You're doing rehab for alcohol and drugs, and you're getting nothing.
It's a touchy subject, especially for treatment providers, because that pool of money that's gathered, I think 1% is supposed to get divided. But there's a caveat to that the state's allowed to borrow money from that for other things. So I think we very rarely get it.
Sad.
I don't want to misspeak because I
No.
don't know exactly. I don't want to misspeak because I don't know how much has been distributed in the past. I can almost say the same exact thing. If we had 10 more buildings, we could fill them right now. And we're trying hard to expand our services to add more residential treatment. We do have, we're kind of missing the middle part, like the 28-day program. And we're actually in the process now of trying to start one for men and for women. We keep our men and women programs separate. Our detox right now, it is co-ed, but it's a highly monitored program, and we only have 7 beds. So think about what Rich is dealing with, and he has some of his clients need to come up to us, and all we have are 7 beds to offer. We're the only non-medical detox left in the state of New Hampshire because the state does not fund them anymore. So Serenity Place started 38 years ago as a detox program, and we felt that we could never let that go. And it's such a necessary thing, so it goes unfunded. We do get $7,500 a year in CIP money consistently, when we usually ask for about 15. So we're certainly not going to complain about any money that we do get. And the issue we're having is affordable treatment options for the clients that do come into detox and do want to continue on. Like you said, once you have them, you want to keep them. And if they're working with our direct care workers and helping them on their next steps after they're done. And lately we've been keeping people longer than 7 days because they have nowhere to go. So we were sending them to Phoenix House Franklin, which has closed, to Dublin, and sometimes even to Portland, Maine. So we're pulling them out of their natural support systems to send them off for long-term treatment. Who knows what can happen? And then we hope they come back to go to one of our transitional living programs. We have Lynn's Place on Manchester Street and Terrell House right behind Pappy's Pizza for men.
Yes.
And we're also dealing with the same issue, transitional living. They're there for 3 months or more. Lately it's been a lot more than 3 months, and it's a phased program, so they have to have received some sort of treatment within the past year, but they have to be clean for 30 days to enter the program. They fill out an application and they go through an interview process. So it's a residential program where they stay with us and they phase through, and we work with them on basic life skills, starting a bank account, finding a job, looking for housing, but they still have their groups every day. They can go out to meetings. It's basically regaining their accountability and responsibility, reconnecting with their families. So when they get close to the point where they feel like I can go out and do this and they need to find housing, it's so expensive that I think that's one of the roadblocks. And we have talked about an assisted program for long-term housing that still offered some resources so they could move on from transitional living and then move into long-term housing and still have access to the case manager, or, you know, if they felt like there was a relapse coming on, they know exactly who to call. It's just a struggle.
So people might say, well, what about Section 8? Can't they get Section 8? Because if their income is so low that they need to be subsidized?
They can, but the last I heard, Section 8 waiting list was 7 to 10 years.
don't fund
Please
like they
correct me
used
if
to.
I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, where I've had a few guys over at Bergeron House, that's the name of our permanent supported housing model, that they've been on the Section 8 waiting list for 3-4 years already, and they're just waiting to get that letter saying they're next on the list.
And I suppose it's by need, and so mothers with children perhaps get
They do,
top of the list,
yeah, they
or
do
pregnant women.
prioritize, and vets are also
How
prioritized.
much
The
money is
veterans?
available, because there's now a cap. I'm curious about Stephanie's program. If I needed a bed there, how long would I have to wait to get in?
If you needed a detox bed, you could call and do a phone screen, and you would talk to our intake coordinator. Depending on the balance of men and women and who's leaving, and it's kind of a shell game sometimes. And sometimes people don't show for their intake, so then it depends. It could be 3 or 4 days, it could be 5 days, and then sometimes we've just lost people. Part of the process after you do your phone screen is we ask that people do a bed check every day, so you call, just so we know that you're still interested in a bed. But it could be a couple days, and anything can happen in that time period. You could change your mind, and anything's possible.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of meeting people where they're at, and we don't even have enough space. I mean, sometimes I cover the front office just so our poor receptionist can eat a sandwich. And on busy days, now every day is a busy day. We have parents desperate, people desperate for help. They've called everywhere. They have there's really nowhere to go because either we don't have enough treatment. So I'll on the fly do a phone screen if I'm able to, and I can't even tell the person when I would be able to. I have to pass it on to the intake coordinator. There's so many people that are so frustrated at the lack of services, and there's just not enough. For the level of the issue we have, the treatment options are very limited, and having potentially, we could possibly lose the New Hampshire Healthcare Protection Program, where the people who were eligible for services through Medicaid, it looks like that's not going to continue. So the people that could get treatment using Medicaid, that's going to...
But we're supposed to have Obamacare, and it's supposed to be so much better.
But the state has to accept it.
It's at the state level.
The legislature is now talking about pulling out the expansion. If they do that, she's correct. They'll lose that service.
Yeah.
So we're on Medicaid expansion right now for 2 years, and then it sunsets.
Yeah, it looks
so
like.
we have to either come up with something new.
It looks that way.
Yeah.
And we're talking right now. They're figuring right now there's about 39,000 citizens on that expansion. If you remove the funding, how many of those 39,000? Excuse me. How many of those 39,000 people that are on that service need rehab? A good percentage.
Oh gosh, it's a pretty high statistic.
And that's where lies the problem. You can't help people if you don't have the service to provide.
We made some progress, and then I feel like
we're
being pulled back.
Yeah. Well, another one of the things I think is a overarching issue with substance abuse is it's a mindset that talks about that point of desperation where you actually have an opportunity to reach that individual because they've had enough, which means they need it now. And it may seem...
They've made the decision in their mind and heart.
Yeah. So turning around and saying, well, you have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks, unfortunately, you're losing that point of desperation and that teachable moment for that individual. Which
and where does that person go then? To the street? And is that why we have people sleeping on the sidewalk and in the parks?
Homelessness is a much more complex issue than just substance abuse and mental health. Okay. You got to remember there are people that are escaping domestic violence situations. About 25% of the individuals who show up at the day center, both men and women, are claiming they're escaping a domestic violence situation. There's lots of reasons for homelessness. It could be unemployment or underemployment, where they just don't make enough money to meet the requirement to maintain housing. I'm sure everybody was outside this past winter. I can tell you Helping Hands exploded our heating budget. We went 50% over our heating budget this past year, so I couldn't imagine what it's like for that family or that individual who has one utility included in their rent, and that utility is not heat. And they're making $10, $11 an hour, and all of a sudden their oil bill is half of their monthly paycheck. Now, granted, there are assistance programs out there, but unfortunately, the pay demand is much higher than what most people can swing. So homelessness is much more complex than just people struggling with substance abuse. I would say at the day center we see about 50 to 65% of the individuals who show up have some kind of substance abuse issue. But that's not all of them. It's not nearly all of them. Every month we see about 180 to 190 people come to the center. Every month we see about 50 to 75 new homeless show up at the center. That's people who have not availed themselves.
What is happening to our society? It's falling apart.
We're not taking care of it anymore. Remember, you made a good point. Not too many years ago, I remember that, the state used to fund a lot of these programs, and then they cut it off. And so the program that she has, she's the last one left in the state, and the state no longer funds it. They used to fund quite a few of them. So when government that did things that was that solved our problems, do away with that, your problem comes back. Instead, sometimes they create programs that we don't need, and we should have kept what we had.
Well, to some degree that's true, but that's also, it comes from federal as well. It's not just state.
True.
I sit on the board for the shelter directors with the state. I meet with Maureen Ryan and others at BHHS, and they're kind of hamstringed by the same issues we are, where what the government wants to see as a target population being served changes every few years. And right now, what they're really gearing towards is vets coming back. But my understanding is very shortly that will change to families, because what happens is every January they do a homeless pit count. It's held the last January of each year. And we had 525 counted, homeless individuals counted in Manchester. That includes family. 191 of those 525 are families. So the government is seeing that trend nationally. So they're switching their funding more towards homeless families. So it's kind of like flavor of the day, for the lack of a better phrase, where a couple years ago the trend was homeless veterans, so they geared more money towards veterans. And that's really kind of what we see on a state level. And our state government has to respond to that. If that's what the government is making available, it's better to take some funding over none.
The federal funds that are available, they have to take.
So that's kind of what happens at the state level, is it changes every couple years. So I can tell you what the trend is. The current trend as far as housing programs with the government is what's called a housing first model, and the philosophy is you get them into a stable environment and then you make the services available. They don't have to avail themselves of the services, but just make them available. And the whole point being is if you're struggling on where you're going to sleep that night and where you're going to find your next meal, you're not concerned about getting mental health help, you're not concerned about getting addiction help, you're not concerned about getting services for domestic violence or whatever else caused your homelessness in the first place. So it's much more complex than that, than just saying it's an addictions issue, because it is not.
So if the community says, you know, it's terrible that people are sleeping out in the cold at night, and why can't there be enough beds in the shelter? Because they know we have a shelter.
Yep.
Can there be enough beds in the shelter? Or, like Mayor Gass has opened up a shelter when it got real cold.
For 3 days.
To try to take some overflow.
72 people in those 3 days showed up. Now, there were other cold times in the winter with blizzards and that, and it was never reopened. And that questions me. You start something for 3 days, so you average about 24 people per night. That means to me that you have a need. And when we have another same emergency, we don't follow up. That is a problem.
What does that tell you, that incident?
It is an issue. I know why they did it, or from my understanding, because there are some individuals that can't go to New Horizons. There are certain individuals, because of our state contract, that can't come to Helping Hands. What I'm talking about is sex offenders. Yes. We cannot accept sex offenders. It's in our state grant contract that we cannot. So that was part of the reason they opened it up, was for the people who couldn't go to New Horizons for one reason or another. And then you have your diehard homeless individuals that will camp outside all year long. In the middle of January, it can be 20 below, that just choose not to. But that being said, we could have more. And to answer your question more directly, a big part of it is funding. I mean, that's the reality of it, is where do we get the money?
That is reality.
I can tell you, to house, feed, clothe the guy, provide him case management services, get him access to SNAP program benefits, get him job training. One of the great partnerships we have is with Goodwill, that does an employment piece, helps people rebuild their resumes, does mock interviews, teach them how to do an interview appropriately, how to sell themselves, and attain employment. We can do all that at Helping Hands for about $26 a day. And if you think about that, that's not a lot of money to provide all those services.
No.
So cost effective, it is very much cost effective. However, we have our limitations, number one, with the size of our building, and number two, we run out of money. I mean, we are a smaller agency.
So if we had benefactors in the city that or people to donate, and maybe you can buy another building,
We're
at a
in the process
reasonable
of doing
cost?
that right now. We actually received a $750,000 tax credit grant from the Community Development Finance Authority, so we're eligible to sell those tax credits to local businesses to help us fund.
Okay.
We just have to find a building that the city will let us go into. We are on to Plan C, which comes with a very significant, I guess, community connection. Our next plan that we're moving on to is not in the north end, so we're hoping that we won't get a lot of pushback like we did on Webster Street. But the funding, trying to sell tax credits and trying to keep our doors open at the same time, my answers are exactly the same. More funding, and we're also bound not just by state contracts, but we would love to serve as many people as we can, but we're bound by the state healthcare facility licensing process. So you're licensed to have a certain amount of beds, and you can't exceed that. So that's why we have to grow, so we can serve more people. And we really are going to continue to serve. We're not straying from our mission. We're serving the most vulnerable, homeless.
So the bottom line is people should come to you, fill out an application if they have a need, or a family member can bring a person at risk or a person's having trouble.
How can you guys be reached?
If you need treatment, you have to access it yourself. Any family member can call to get information, but you can call us at 625-6980, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Can you say that number again?
625-6980, crisis line. You will get someone on the phone.
Do you have a crisis line for the men?
It's not a crisis line, but we do have a business line. It's 623-8778. You can also call 211 for general homelessness services as well.
211?
211, yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So anyone can call 211 if they're just wanting to find a number to start somewhere, and they will get who at the end of the other end of the line?
211 is serviced by Granite United Way, and they have people answering the phones in any different language, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So whatever your need is, if you're a homeless individual or imminently becoming homeless, they can direct you in the right way.
Oh, that's
We're
good.
out of time, but I do have to ask one short question, yes or no answer. If we had in this city a roundtable discussion to talk about the issues on this location, would you two attend?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll see what the next step is, and we're bringing awareness to the community, folks. And I think this is a great discussion. I appreciate you coming on, both of you. And if you need to come on again, let us know. We'll give any amount of time to bring awareness to the community or any needs that you have. Okay. So I thank you, Glenn,
Thank you for having me.
for being my co-host today. And well, folks, we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you next time on Our City Matters. Thank you.
Thank you.